Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. This is Ahmed Saeed. We will continue today inshallah in our session on Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation SSRS reports. In our last sessions we talked about how we can create report using a query and using DB and what is a contract and how we can use a contract. So today inshallah we will continue by using the controller in our report. So, as we mentioned before in our element session, controller is a class which exists in the report. It helps us in the report to make some filtration, additional filtration in the report if we just need to print a specific record or a data related to a specific record, and also how we can control the design if we have many designs on our report and we need to print a design according to parameter or something in the. So today inshallah we will continue with the controller in our report which we created before as we saw. So if we go to account receivable and here in inquiries and report we added our report here. So for this report, we have to, if we need to print the report for a specific customer, we have to make a filtration from here for the specific customer. So suppose now we have here in our account receivable, we have here all customers for, and now if we need to add a button like this button which called print invoices, and according to using this button, if we clicked on this button, it will generate our report which we created, but for a specific customer, for the selected customer, we will select here. So if we select this customer, for example, and try to print the invoices, it will just generate the invoices related to this customer. So the best choice here we can use is the controller. Let's start with building our controller and do this task using the controller. So here in Visual Studio, let's start to add our controller class. So here we will just let's delete this one. So here we will create or add a new class. It will be sales. Let's take the name from here. It will be sales invoice string controller, and let's add the controller class. So here this is the class. We will make it as a public class, and this class should be extended from a standard controller class to be able to use all the methods and the features for the control. So here we will extend from extend or inheritance from SRS report run controller. So this is a standard uh, controller class. It will help us to get all the features for the control. And let's here start with our first method for the controller. So here if we go to the designer and here as we extended from the standard class, we will be able to override the methods exist in this class. So here the first method we will override here. It will be the main or we will create here. It will be the main method. So here we will create a main method inside this controller. It will be public static void main, and this method will take a parameter from args class. Args class is a class responsible for pass parameters from anywhere to this class, as we will see later. So we will make it args, and inside this class let's start with take an object from this class. Again this SRS report controller class, and we will make it controller, and this will equal to new, and will take the same controller which we created here. It will be an instance from this controller. So we took an object from the standard controller class and we will equal this object with the controller which we created. And here we will start to pass the arguments which will be passed from this args class to our controller here. So for the controller, and we will use it later as we will see inshallah. Dot bar, there is a standard method here called barm args. We will pass the args which we got in the main method parameter here. And also here one of the most important things should be included in our main method. It's the controller or the report design and the report name. So here in the controller dot bar, there is a method called bar report name. In this method, as I mentioned before, we can define the design here for the report. So here we will add the initial design which we need to be extracted while the report generates the report. So this method take a parameter, just one parameter for the report name, and here we will add SSRS report str, and this will take our report. So we'll go to and copy the report name. This is the report which we used. And here let's add our design. We just have one design in this report, so we'll copy this design and add it there in the main method. And let's start here controller dot start operation to just start to generate our report. So here in our first method in the controller is the main method, and inside this method we have to take an object from the standard controller and assign the controller which we created to it. Here also we will pass arguments for this controller according to or using this method, and we will see later why we passed the arguments here. And here we have the controller. This is very important to define the control, the report name and the design which will be used while generating the report using this controller, and we will start with running our controller. So here we define the first method, which is the main method. The second method, which is responsible for passing the parameter or using the parameter and pass this parameter to our query. So here, if we go back to the controller and if we try to override, we will find here a method called pre pre-promote modify contract. So we'll override this method. This method we can use it if we just need to add additional filtration or additional values to our query for this report. So our report is using a query in the DB as we saw in our last session. So here we need to pass a value for the customer account to our query to start to just filter the query or filter the data according to this value. So let's start with our code here. As we saw in our DB here, let's go to the DB class which we created. Here we started to add the filtration according to the invoice date. So we take an object from query builder data source and we rename it to be custom visual, as we will make the filtration for the invoice date in custom visual table. But here we will need to do the same but for the cost table. So here we will create or take an object from query builder data source, and this will be QBDS cast cast table, as we will take an object from the cast table data source which exists on the query. And let's take an object from cast table. We will use this object to take the record which will pass from the cast for and assign it to this cast table uh, variable, and we will make it cast, for example, table, and we'll take an object from query. Now we take all the variables which we need. We take an object from query builder data source for the cast table which exists in our query, and we have the cast table and we have the query. So here, as we mentioned, according to we passed the args. The args is the arguments or the parameters which will be sent from the cast form to our controller here in main method, and here we passed it in barm args here. So here we can easily say or check if we already got a parameter or a record. So here we can say if this for the controller dot bar args, this one, if there is an arguments or parameters already passed from the controller dot record. If there is a record passed to our arguments, as we will check while running the report, we will make our cast table equal to this record which will be passed from the cast form. So here we assign the record which passed from the parameters here from args to our cast table object here, and let's start with our query. So we will here type query, the object of the query which we got, equal to this dot bar query, or it will be get first query to get the query which exists on this report, and start. If we find a query on this report of query, we will start to assign our parameters. So here we have this object from the data source cast table. It will equal to the query, because in our query we already, if we checked again our query here, we already have in our query here we have the cast table. So we will get this cast table from the query data source table, and here as we saw before it will take a parameter for table number, and it will be cast table. So here we added in our query builder data source cast table, we added our cast table, and we can before we add the range and the range value, let's first to clear the ranges, because if the user select any range in this query, we have to just clear the ranges for this query to be able just filter, or to make sure that we will just filter according to the value which passed in cast table record. So here, as we saw in our DB, we take an object from query build range. We can easily use the query builder data source by directly add the range without using the query build range. So here we will add the range directly to the query builder data source, and here it's required a parameter which is the field num, and field num will take the cast table and account num. Now we added the range to our query, so we can also add a value dot value will take a string value, and this string value will be the customer account which we have in our cast table record dot account. Now, so now we finished from our code here. Let's explain the code again. We created a controller class. This controller class extends from SRS report run controller. This is the standard controller class. We will be able, according to this inheritance or this extends, to use all the features existing on this controller. So the first method will be on our controller is the main method. The main method is the first method will be called while calling the report or try to extract the report. And this method will be static void main method, and it takes just one parameters from args class. Args class is a class which we can assign or add to this class some parameters, like if we need to pass a record, if we need to pass a text, if we need to pass anything or object to this class, we can easily use args class. And here we take an object from the standard controller and we will assign our controller to this standard controller and start here with the parm args. The arguments will be passed to this main method because this is the first method and will be we will set the value according to parm args here, and as we can see here we will get the value here in our pre-promised modified contract. And here the most important thing to assign the value for or the initial value for the our report here. We will add our report here. This is the report and the design, and let's start the operation. Now we need to add additional filtration to our query. So here or ranges to our query. So here we have to override the standard method exists in our in the standard controller, which called pre-promised modified contract. If we need to add a range to our query, if we have a query in our report and we need to add a range or a filtration on this query, we can easily override this method. And here we have to determine which data sources exist in our query. We need to filter on it or add ranges to this data source. So we get an object. We add an object for query build data source, and it will be the cast table which exists in our query. And we take an object from the cast table because, as we will see while adding the while generating the report, it will pass according to the current record which we selected in our cast form here. It will pass all of this record once we clicked here, and it will come to our controller and assign this record to this object. And here to make sure that it will not do any conflicts or any errors, if we have a record already exist in our controller, we will assign this record to the cast table and start with our query. And this code to just this to get first query, it will just get the query which assigned to our report in the DB and assign it to the query. And if we find the query, we will start in query builder data source which we added for the cast table to make to add the cast table to this query builder data source and clear the ranges to make sure that if the user previously select any ranges, it will be clear. And here we will add the range and add the value from the record which we passed. So after we finish the code for the controller, we will just need to add a new menu item, and it will be output. Let's take the name from here. Suppose it will be sales invoice 3 in 1. And inside this output, we will not here as we did before, we will not here pass the report, we will just pass the controller which we created. So here we will change the type to B class and we'll add the controller. We will add the controller and we will create to add this button which we added here. We will just check the form name. The form name is called cast table. Let's create an extension from this form. So here in application object tree or on AOT, we will go to cast table and create extension. I believe we already created extension here. So here in the form extension cast table, we already have an extension from this one. So we'll add it to our project and let's open the form. So here in the form, we have here, for example, in the customer, let's see here add our button. So we'll add here inside this group, for example, we will add a menu item button and it will be print invoices. And here let's add a text to be also print invoices. And here we have the menu item type, it will be output, and we'll add the new menu item which we created, it will be sales invoice train one. Now we added our menu item to a button here. So let's explain what will happen once the user will press here on print invoices. Here, if we expand the data sources, we will find the first data source exists in our form here, it's the cast table. So by default, we didn't need to do anything here except we added the menu item button here and assign the output menu item here to this menu item button. Once the user will click on this menu item button, the system will go to the controller class which exists in this menu item here, output menu item here. The system will go to and check the object and it will find the object is sales invoice controller. And once it go to the sales invoice controller, it will call the first method here is the main method and start with our code here by creating an object from the controller and pass the arguments. The arguments which will be passed here by default as the standard as the first data source exists on the form as a cast table, it will take the cast table as arguments or as a parameter, and it will pass it here to this args. And according to this code, we assigned to our controller this args to be able to use it on anywhere in the controller. And it will call, or according to this, it will call this report which we already created before and with this design, and will start the operation. Before we generate the report, or before the system generates the report, it will go to this method which called pre-prompt modify contract. This method we can use it if we need to use the parameter which passed here for the record to filter anything on the query. So we started with our code here with building our query build data source and the cast table and so on, and according to the value which passed from the form to args and to here, we will assign this record to the cast table and start with our filtration. So this is how it's work. And now let's build our project and check the result together. Now after we build our project, let's check here our code if it's working fine or not. Let's test it. We have here this button which we will add print invoices. If we clicked on this button, as we can see here, we can add the same which we did before. We can select a specific period if we need, and if we expand the record include, we will see here it's just take the record which we selected. So if we press cancel and select, for example, this one, and try to print the invoice and check the record include, we'll find it's got the customer which we selected here from the record. So first of all, it will clear the existing ranges and start with the new ranges for this customer. And if we press OK, so the report will be only extracted for the customer which we select. Now we know how we can add additional or pass a record from a form to our report using the controller, and this is the first use of the controller. We have another use for the controller if we need to, for example, to determine or select a specific design. Suppose now, if we print the invoice or print the report from here, we just have the invoice header details. So in our invoices, if we go to again to account receivable and the invoice journal, if we go to account receivable here and inside invoice journal, so we just take the header, the information for the header, the total of the invoices. And if we need to extract or expand the details or see more details for the invoice, if we open the invoice, we can see here inside this, we can see the item which we sold in this invoice, and we have the quantity and the amount per item. Now, suppose we need to have two design. The first one will be just the summary for the invoice, and another one will be with more details for the invoice. So we have to include this table in our data source, and let's check together how we can add it to our query and how we can create another design using, and this design will include more details, and how we can, according to a parameter, we can select any design we need. So here let's check the table which includes the invoice details. Here if we just right click, for example, for the item and form information, we will find the table which called cast invoice trans. So let's go to our query and add this table. So let's open the query, and inside the query, inside, because this table is subsidiary or the under custom invoice jour. So here in custom invoice jour, let's add a new data source, and here the table will be cast invoice trans, and we will select our fields, and here we will use the relation to use the standard relation, because if we go to this table, we will find under relations, we will find there is a standard relation between this table and the custom invoice. So now we added the table to our query. So now let's go to the DB and start to use this table in our DB. But before we go to the DB, we can easily go to the the temp table which we added, and here let's add, for example, the item ID and the required fields. So here in our temp table, we added four fields for the item ID, quantity, price, and amount. This is the fields which we will add in our report. And here we, in our data provider, we started, as we saw before, we added the required tables which already exist in the query. By the same way, we will add the cast invoice trans. We will take an object from cast invoice trans, and here in query run, while run the query, we will assign the data source which exists in the query for custom voice trans to our object here, and start to add our required field. So the temp table which we created dot item ID equal to cast trans dot item ID, and the price, the quantity, and the amount. We now assigned all the fields value from the cast invoice trans. So now we finished by adding the query, the table to our query, and added the required fields, and inside the DB itself we added uh, and assign the values to our temp table. So let's go to our report here, and as we mentioned before, we can easily, if we just need to add our additional fields, we will go to the query which we have here and click next, and the field is already here, so it's okay, it's fine to make sure that the field is here, or we can easily restore the fields as we did before to make sure that all the fields which we added to the temp table is here. So now let's add another auto design, which will be auto design, for example, summary details, and let's make sure this one include all the required fields. So here let's start to sort our fields here. We will add the customer account, then the customer name, the sales ID, the invoice ID, invoice date, and we have the invoice amount, have the item ID, the quantity, the price, and the amount. Now we added all the fields which will be on the details design. So let's start with use a controller to determine which design we need to be displayed. But before this, let's now go to the contract, and inside our contract we will add here uh, we will add another parameter here. So for example, it will be no yes, and it will be show details, and here also in our, let's duplicate this one, not here, and it will be show details. This one will be 3, and the data type will be no yes, show details, no yes also. Let's make it t and equal to show detail variable, and this one, let's return the value for this one. Now we added additional parameter to our report to be able or give the user option to, if the user need to show report with details with the lines and the items, or just need a summary for the invoice header. So let's go back again to the report and restore the parameters or restore the dataset to be able to see here. As we can see here, we will find the parameters details. So after this, we will just build and deploy the report to make sure that everything is working fine. And let's go to our controller to be able to select the design according to the parameter which will be selected from the user. Now after we added our new design and add the parameter to the contract class, let's go to the controller and check how we can control the design or select the design according to the parameter will be selected from the user. So let's go to our uh, class here, and as we override the pre-programmed modified contract, we have another method. We can override this method to change the design as we need according to the parameter. So we have here a method called pre-run modify contract. If we need to update the parameter, update the design or select the design or navigate between designs exist in the report according to the parameter, we can use this method. So here, first of all, we have to take an object from our contract class which we created. So it will be sales invoice train contract. This is a class for the contract which we created, and we will rename it contract, and this will be equal to, we will take the contract from the controller according to the contract which we assign to the DB, and then to the report. So here will be this. To get the contract for this report, we can type this dot burn report report con sorry burn report contract dot burn RTB contract. Now we got the contract from the report which assigned to this report as will cast this one to be sales invoice stream contract. Now we got the contract. Let's start to check the value which the user will be select while showing the report. So we will say if contract dot bar, we added a new method with no yes data type, so it will be just no or yes. We will check the value which come from this report or this parameter, and if it's yes, we need to show the design which includes the details for the report. So here we can easily assign the value for the report name and the report design. So this to do this, we will just type this dot bar report contract dot bar report name, and as we did in the top, we will just add from here. We will just take SSRS report design and add it here. But here we will just use the design which includes the details, because here we check if the parameter for the details is selected and it's yes. So here from the report, let's take the name and let's say else. If it's not selected and it's not true, we will add the same, but here we will get the auto design which just have the summary for the invoices. Let's explain our code again. Here to navigate or select a design according to a parameter, we have to override a method called pre-run modify contract. Inside this method, we will take an object from our contract to be able to use the parameters existed in this contract, and here we will check the value for the parameter. For example, here we need to check the perm show details parameter value, and if it's yes, we will just pass according to this code. We will just pass we will use the same report but with different design, and so on. Here if it's false, we will use the auto design, the old one. Let's build the project and check the result together. After we build the project, let's check how it will be, the report, how it will work. So here let's select this customer, and if we try to print the invoices, we will find these additional parameters which we called show details. We will make it no and try to generate the report. And as we can see here, we just have the customer name, and we have the other information for the sales order, the invoice, only the header for the report. We will not have the details. Let's run the report once again and let's check how it will be. Let's select show details here and press OK. And here, as we can see here, we will find the customer and the customer name. We will find the sales, the same information for the header, but here we will have additional information for the line. We will have the item ID, the quantity, and we will have the price and the amount. So this is how we can easily navigate between designs according to parameters, and how we can pass a record from a form to our report, and how we can use it through the controller.